What if the most powerful gift in the world wasn't wrapped in gold, wasn't sitting inside a luxury boutique, and definitely didn't come with a designer logo? What if it was something so simple, so ordinary, that most people would walk past it without a second glance? But here's the twist, that one humble gift ended up shaping the destiny of 7 boys who would grow up to become the biggest music act on the planet. We're talking about BTS. Now, before you assume this is just another sentimental story about idols and their families, hold on, because this list is going to challenge everything you think you know about what it takes to build a dream. Did you know that one member's mother had to skip meals just to afford a single item that cost less than a pair of sneakers? Or that another member's first gift wasn't even brand new, it was secondhand, scratched, and barely functioning, but it became the foundation of a Grammy-nominated career? Can you guess which member received something so unexpected that even his own bandmates were shocked when they heard the story for the first time on live broadcast? And what about the member whose mother gave him a gift that he literally carried in his pocket every single day for years, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him why he couldn't give up? These aren't fairy tales. These are real moments exposed from interviews, documentaries, and the members' own words across years of content, from Bangtan bombs to Weverse, lives to deeply personal album notes. This is not about money. This is about sacrifice, belief, and the kind of love that doesn't need a receipt. So get comfortable, because we're counting down from number 7 to number 1, 7 mothers, 7 gifts, 7 stories that prove the most expensive thing in the world is faith in your child. Let's go. Number 7. Jin. A simple recipe written on paper, the blueprint of a golden hyung. You'd think the eldest member of the biggest boy band in history grew up surrounded by privilege, right? After all, Kim Seokjin was born on December 4th, 1992, in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, into a family that, compared to some of his future bandmates, was financially stable. His father was a businessman, a CEO-level figure who worked hard to give his family a comfortable life. The Kim household wasn't struggling to put food on the table. They weren't counting coins at the end of the month. So when we talk about not a luxury item, you might wonder, what could Jin's mother possibly give him that wasn't already available in their household? And that's exactly where this story gets interesting. Because Jin's mother didn't give him a gadget. She didn't give him a brand-name toy. She didn't hand him something wrapped in shiny paper from a department store. What she gave him was something so unbelievably simple that most kids would have tossed it aside without a second thought. She gave him a handwritten collection of family recipes, scribbled on plain paper, folded neatly, passed down from her own mother before her. A few sheets of paper with measurements, ingredients, cooking steps, and little notes in the margins like, add more salt if your father complains, or stir slowly, don't rush. That's it. No gold. No glamour. Just ink on paper. But if you followed Jin's journey for even a single year, you already know that gift didn't just sit in a drawer. It became the foundation of one of his most defining traits, one that millions of fans around the world fell in love with, his genuine, almost obsessive love for cooking. And not just cooking for himself, cooking for others. Cooking as care. Cooking as connection. Cooking as love spoken without words. If you go back and watch early Bangtan bombs from 2013 and 2014, you'll notice something that separates Jin from the other trainees. While most of them were ordering delivery or eating convenience store ramen between practice sessions, Jin was in the kitchen. Not a fancy kitchen, the tiny, cramped kitchen of their Bangtan dorm in Gangnam, where 7 boys shared a space barely big enough for 3. Jin would stand there with a cutting board and a frying pan, making kimchi jjigae, doenjang jjigae, or simple egg rice, dishes that weren't flashy but tasted like home. And every single time someone asked him, "Hyung, where did you learn to cook like this?" his answer was always the same: my mom. Not a cooking academy. Not a YouTube tutorial. His mom. Those recipes she wrote down for him weren't just instructions, they were a philosophy. Jin's mother believed that the most important thing a person could do was nourish the people around them. Not with expensive ingredients. Not with restaurant-level technique. But with patience, attention, and the willingness to stand in front of a hot stove when everyone else was too tired to bother. And Jin absorbed that philosophy like a sponge. It seeped into his personality so deeply that by the time BTS debuted on June 13th, 2013, Jin had already become the unofficial mom of the group, not because anyone assigned him that role, but because he naturally filled it. He was the one who made sure the younger members ate before going to bed. He was the one who woke up early to prepare breakfast when they had a 6 a.m. schedule. He was the one who packed snacks in his bag during overseas tours because he knew Jungkook would get hungry between rehearsals and wouldn't say anything about it. And all of that, every single bit of it, traces back to a few sheets of handwritten recipes from a mother who understood that love isn't about price tags. Now here's the part that really gets you. During a Bon Voyage episode, the reality travel show where BTS members go on vacation together, there was a moment that flew under the radar for casual viewers, but hit hard for anyone paying attention. The members were in a foreign country, the kitchen was unfamiliar, the ingredients were different from what they'd find in Korea, and Jin was tasked with making dinner for everyone. He could have ordered takeout. He could have suggested going to a restaurant. But instead, he stood in that kitchen for over an hour, improvising with whatever he could find, adjusting flavors from memory, tasting and retasting until it was right. And when the members sat down to eat and Taeyong said, "This tastes like something my grandmother would make," Jin smiled quietly and said, "That's the highest compliment you can give." He didn't say it for the cameras. He wasn't performing. He meant it because in Jin's world, the greatest achievement of a dish isn't that it tastes gourmet. It's that it tastes like someone's home. That's what his mother gave him. Not a recipe for bibimbap or galbi. She gave him the understanding that food is a bridge between people. And Jin carried that bridge with him from Gwacheon to the big-hit trainee dorms to sold-out stadiums in Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. Even after BTS became a global phenomenon, after the Billboard #1s, after the United Nations speeches, after the Grammy nominations, Jin never stopped cooking. In Weverse Lives, you'd find him casually making ramen at midnight, talking to fans like he was chatting with a friend in his kitchen. In Run BTS episodes, the cooking challenges weren't just games for him, they were moments where he came alive in a way that felt different from performing on stage. Quieter. More personal, more real. And if you ever wondered why Jin's military enlistment farewell hit fans so differently, why the tears felt heavier, why the silence felt louder, it's because Jin wasn't just an idol to them. He was the Hyung who fed you when you were hungry. The one who showed that caring for someone doesn't require a spotlight. The one who proved that the most unforgettable gift a mother can give her son isn't something that comes in a box. It's something that comes from the heart, written on paper and carried for a lifetime. So the next time you see Kim Seokjin standing in a kitchen, casually chopping vegetables with that calm, focused expression, remember where it all started. A few sheets of paper, a mother's handwriting, and a lesson that the most luxurious thing in the world is someone who bothers to cook for you when they don't have to. But if you think a handwritten recipe is a humble beginning, wait until you hear what number SIX's mother did, because this next gift didn't just shape a personality, it literally rewired a brain and opened a door to an entirely different language, an entirely different world, and an entirely different version of a boy who almost gave up on himself before he even started. Number 6. Suga. A second-hand keyboard with broken keys, the birth of a genius. Close your eyes for a second and picture this. A narrow, dimly lit room in Bukgu District, Daegu, one of the grittier, less glamorous neighborhoods in South Korea's fourth largest city. The walls are thin enough that you can hear the neighbors arguing about bills. The floor is cold because the heating system only works half the time, and when winter hits Daegu, it hits hard, temperatures plunging below -10, the kind of cold that makes your fingers stiff and your breath visible even indoors. In that room, there's a boy. Skinny, pale, quiet in the way that people who carry too many thoughts tend to be. His name is Min Youngie, born March 9th, 1993, and at this point in his life, nobody, absolutely nobody, would look at him and think that kid is going to become one of the most celebrated music producers in the 21st century. Because right now, he's just a kid in Daegu whose family can barely make ends meet. His father works long hours. His mother stretches everyone like it's made of rubber, calculating grocery bills in her head before she even walks into the store, choosing the bruised apples because they're discounted, skipping meals so her sons can eat full portions. This isn't a dramatization. Youngie himself has spoken about this, raw, unfiltered, without self-pity, in his August D mixtapes, in behind-the-scenes documentaries, in late-night V-Lives where the mask of idol Suga slips away and you're left with Min Youngie, the boy from Daegu who remembers what hunger feels like. So, what does a mother in that situation give her son as a gift? Not a PlayStation. Not a bicycle. Not new shoes for the school year. She gives him a keyboard. A second-hand, beat-up, electronic keyboard, the kind you'd find in a dusty corner of a flea market or a used goods store in the back alleys of Daegu's Seomun Market District. Some of the keys were chipped. The sound quality was tinny, almost metallic, nothing close to the warm resonance of a real piano. The power cable had to be plugged in at just the right angle or it would cut out mid-note. It wasn't a Yamaha Grand. It wasn't a Roland studio board. It was barely even functional by most musicians' standards. And it cost his mother money she didn't have. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't a woman with a savings account pulling from a rainy day fund. This was a woman who had been quietly, secretly, setting aside tiny amounts, 1,001 here, 2,001 there over weeks, maybe months, because she had noticed something about her son that nobody else seemed to care about. She noticed that Youngie didn't just listen to music. He disappeared into it. When a song came on the radio, he didn't tap his foot casually like most kids. He stopped moving entirely. His eyes would go somewhere else, somewhere internal, somewhere unreachable, as if he was deconstructing the melody in real time, pulling it apart note by note, trying to understand how the pieces fit together. She saw that, and she made a decision that, by all practical standards, made no financial sense. But mothers don't operate on spreadsheets. They operate on instinct. And her instinct told her, this boy needs a way to speak. Because he wasn't speaking with words. Youngie was and still is famously quiet in conversation. He doesn't fill silence with small talk. He doesn't perform enthusiasm he doesn't feel. As a child, this made him seem withdrawn, even difficult. Teachers might have called him disengaged. Classmates might have thought he was cold. But his mother knew the difference between a boy who has nothing to say and a boy who has everything to say but no language to say it in. So she gave him a language. 78 keys. Some of them broken. All of them priceless. And here's what happened next, because this isn't just a touching story about a mom buying a gift. This is the origin story of an entire artistic identity. Youngie didn't just play that keyboard. He consumed it. He sat in that cold room for hours, not practicing scales like a conservatory student, but experimenting. Pressing keys and combinations he'd never heard before. Recording snippets on a cheap cassette player. Layering sounds in his head the way an architect layers blueprints. He had no formal training. No teacher. No YouTube tutorials. This was the early 2000s in Daegu, not exactly a hub of musical education resources. Everything he learned, he taught himself. And the keyboard was his classroom, his laboratory, his therapist, and his best friend all at once. By the time he was 13 or 14, Youngie had started writing lyrics. Not cute teenage poetry, real, angry, searching, brutally honest lyrics about what it felt like to grow up without money in a society that measured your worth by your bank account. He was already diving into the Daegu underground hip-hop scene, performing at small venues where the audience was sometimes 5 people and a stray dog. He was producing beats on that same keyboard, recording them with equipment so basic that professional producers would have laughed. But the beats were good. Undeniably, unmistakably good. The raw talent was screaming through every crackly recording. And here's the detail that breaks your heart if you know the full picture. When Youngie eventually left Daegu to audition for Big Hit Entertainment in Seoul, traveling to a city where he knew no one, with almost no money in his pocket, he didn't bring much. But he brought that keyboard. Or more precisely, he brought what that keyboard had given him, a catalog of self-taught compositions, a mind that could hear music in layers, and a stubbornness forged in cold rooms and empty stomachs that said, I will make this work or I will die trying. Fast forward to 2016. BTS releases their Wings album. Track number 7 is called First Love. And when you listen to it, really listen, not just as background noise, but with headphones in and eyes closed, you realize that the entire song is a love letter. Not to a person. To that keyboard. You were the first thing that moved my heart, Youngie says in the track. In that small room, you were everything. The piano melody in First Love starts gentle, almost hesitant, like the first time a child presses a key and hears a sound they made themselves. Then it builds layers of strings, rising intensity, Youngie's voice cracking with an emotion he rarely shows on camera until it crescendos into something enormous, something that sounds like a man finally saying thank you to the thing that saved his life. Because that's what it was. That broken keyboard didn't just teach Min Youngie how to make music. It kept him alive during the years when everything else, school, social life, self-worth, was falling apart. It gave him a reason to wake up in the morning when depression was pulling him under. It gave him a skill that eventually led him to produce not just BTS's biggest hits, but also tracks for artists across the Korean and global music industry. Songs like Life Goes On, which debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Songs from his D-Day album that sold out stadiums worldwide. All of it, every Grammy nomination, every platinum certification, every standing ovation, traces back to a flea market keyboard bought with money a mother couldn't afford to spend, but refused not to. And here's what Youngie said in a 2018 interview that still circulates among fans like a quiet prayer. My mom didn't understand music. She didn't know what hip-hop was. She didn't know what producing meant. But she saw that I needed something, and she gave it to me without asking what it was for. That's not support. That's faith. Faith. Not in music. Not in a career. In her son. That second-hand keyboard with broken keys wasn't a gift you'd put on a wish list. It was a bet, placed by a mother who had almost nothing on a future she couldn't see but somehow believed in. And she won. Every award on Min Youngie's shelf is proof that she won. But don't settle in too comfortably, because the next story on this list isn't about an instrument or a recipe. Number 5's mother gave her son something you can't touch, can't hold, and can't display on a shelf. But it traveled with him across oceans, through rejection letters, and into rooms where people twice his age told him he'd never make it. What was it? Stay right here. Number 5. Jungkook. A worn-out pair of sneakers, the first step toward forever. Let's rewind to 2011. The setting is Mandeok-dong, a working-class neighborhood tucked into the hilly terrain of Bukgu, Busan, South Korea's second-largest city, a port town known for its seafood markets, its salty ocean wind, and its people who speak with a dialect so thick and punchy that folks in Seoul sometimes need subtitles. In this neighborhood, the streets are narrow and steep. The apartment buildings are old but functional, the kind of concrete blocks where laundry hangs from every balcony and the elevator smells like someone's grandmother's doenjang jjigae. In one of those apartments lives a 13-year-old boy named John Jungkook. He's small for his age, round-cheeked. Big eyes that carry an expression somewhere between curious and terrified, like a baby deer who wandered into a highway and isn't sure whether to run or freeze. He's just auditioned for Superstar K3, one of the biggest televised singing competitions in South Korea, a show that launches careers, that turns unknowns into household names overnight. Jungkook didn't win. Didn't even come close. He was eliminated early, and by all normal measures, that should have been the end of the story. A kid from Busan tried, failed, moved on. Except it wasn't the end. Because something unusual happened after that audition, something that almost never happens to a contestant who gets eliminated in the early rounds. 7 entertainment companies contacted him. 7. Not 1, not 2. 7 different agencies saw something in that round-faced kid from Mandeok-dong that made them pick up the phone. JYP Entertainment called. FNC called. Starship called. And a small, relatively unknown company called Big Hit Entertainment called too. Jungkook chose Big Hit. The reason? He watched a rehearsal video of a trainee named Kim Namjoon, the future RM, and thought, that guy is cool. I want to be where he is. A 14-year-old's logic. No market analysis, no contract comparison, no strategic career planning. Just vibes. Just instinct. And that instinct would turn out to be the most consequential decision in modern pop music history. But here's the part they don't put in the highlight reels. Choosing Big Hit meant leaving Busan. It meant leaving his school, his friends, his older brother, and most painfully, his parents. Specifically, his mother. Jungkook was going to move to Seoul, alone at 15 years old, to live in a trainee dormitory with strangers, to practice singing and dancing 16 hours a day, with no guarantee, none, that he would ever debut. The trainee system in K-pop is brutal and well documented. For every idol who makes it to a stage, there are hundreds who train for years and are quietly let go, sent back to their hometowns with nothing but exhaustion and a dream that expired. Jungkook's mother knew this. She wasn't naive. She understood the statistics. She understood that her youngest son, her baby, was walking into a machine designed to consume young people's best years and spit most of them out. And yet she let him go. Not because she didn't care. Because she cared too much to clip his wings. But before he left, she did something. She went to the local market in Mandeok-dong, not the department stores in Siamayan or the fancy shopping district in Haeundae, but the local, no-frills neighborhood market where ajummas sell socks in bulk and shoes sit in open boxes on the sidewalk. And she bought him a pair of sneakers. Simple. White. Unbranded. No logo. No hype. The kind of shoes that 1,000 other kids in Busan were wearing that same week without thinking twice about it. She didn't buy them because they were special. She bought them because his old shoes were falling apart. The soles were worn thin from months of practicing dance moves in the schoolyard, the laces were fraying, and the left shoe had a small tear near the toe that Jungkook had been covering with a piece of tape because he didn't want to ask for new ones. He knew money was careful in their household. He knew his parents worked hard. And even at 14, he had already internalized the quiet guilt that children from modest families often carry, the feeling that wanting something is the same as being a burden. His mother noticed the tape. Of course she did. Mothers notice everything, especially the things their children try to hide. She didn't say, "Why didn't you tell me your shoes were broken?" She didn't make him feel bad for hiding it. She simply came home one evening, set a plastic bag on the table, and said, "For Seoul, you'll be walking a lot." That was it. No speech. No ceremony. Just a pair of white sneakers in a crinkly plastic bag and a sentence that contained an entire universe of meaning. For Seoul meant, "I accept that you're leaving." You'll be walking a lot meant, "I know the road ahead is hard, and I want you to be ready." 7 words. A pair of cheap shoes. And a 15-year-old boy who put them on the next morning looked at himself in the mirror of that tiny Busan apartment and felt, maybe for the first time, like someone believed he could actually make it. Now, here's where this story transcends sentimentality and enters the territory of something almost mythical. Jungkook wore those sneakers during his early trainee days at Big Hit. He wore them in the practice room where he spent hours learning choreography from instructors who pushed him until his legs gave out. He wore them on the streets of Seoul when he wandered alone on his rare days off, homesick and overwhelmed by a city that moved 10 times faster than Busan. He wore them until the rubber was smooth and the white had turned gray and the sole started separating from the canvas. And even after they were unwearable, he kept them. Not displayed on a shelf. Not posted on social media. Just tucked into a corner of his closet, underneath newer, shinier shoes that sponsors and stylists would eventually fill his life with. He kept them the way people keep evidence, proof that something real happened before the fame, before the money, before the world knew his name. If you've watched Jungkook's journey from debut to now, there's a pattern that becomes impossible to ignore. This is a person who runs. Not away from things, toward them. He runs toward challenges with a ferocity that sometimes borders on reckless. When BTS needed someone to learn a new skill, whether it was filming, editing, painting, boxing, diving, tattooing, Jungkook volunteered first and asked questions later. His Golden Closet Films series, self-directed travel videos shot in cities like Tokyo and Helsinki, showed a level of artistic ambition that went far beyond what anyone expected from an idol. His solo single, Dreamers, performed at the opening ceremony of the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar in front of an estimated global audience of over 1 billion people, was a moment so massive that it still doesn't feel real when you type it out. A kid from Mandiok Dong, standing on the biggest stage on Earth, singing to the entire planet. And, through all of it, through 7 breaking Spotify records, through standing next to you channeling Michael Jackson in a way that made even hardened music critics sit up and pay attention, through military service and solo albums and the relentless, unforgiving machinery of global fame, there's a through line that goes back to those sneakers. Because what Jungkook's mother gave him wasn't footwear. It was permission. Permission to leave. Permission to try. Permission to walk into the unknown without looking back, knowing that even if he fell, someone in Busan would still be proud of him for having the courage to take the first step. In a 2019 fan meeting, a fan asked Jungkook what he would say to his 15-year-old self. He paused for a long time, longer than the comfortable silence that variety shows usually allow, and then said, "I'd say, thank you for getting on that train." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Because everyone in that room, and everyone watching the clip later, understood that getting on that train wasn't just about traveling from Busan to Seoul. It was about a boy putting on a pair of cheap white sneakers, hugging a mother who was trying very hard not to cry, and walking toward a future that neither of them could see but both of them chose to believe in. That's not a gift you buy at a store. That's a gift you carry in your bones. But hold that feeling right there, because number 4 is about to introduce you to a mother who didn't just give her son an object or a symbolic gesture. She gave him something that literally changed the direction of his body, something that turned a shy, unsure boy into a force of movement so powerful that choreographers around the world would eventually study his name. What did she give him? And why did it almost not happen? Keep watching. Number 4, J-Hope, a cheap portable CD player, the heartbeat of a dance revolution. Gwangju. If you know anything about South Korean history, that name alone carries weight. A city defined by its spirit of resistance, its fierce artistic identity, and a community that has always believed that expression isn't a luxury, it's a right. Located in the southwestern corner of the Korean peninsula, Gwangju has long been considered the cultural capital of the Jeolla region, a place where art, music, and performance aren't treated as hobbies for the privileged, but as something woven into the daily fabric of life. Street performers aren't a novelty here. They're neighbors. Dance studios sit between barbershops and rice cake shops. And the kids who grow up in Gwangju absorb rhythm the way kids in other cities absorb math homework, naturally, almost unconsciously, as if the city itself has a pulse that beats in 4/4 time. It was in this city, on February 18, 1994, that young Hoseok was born. And from the very beginning, something was different about this boy. Not in the way that teachers or relatives could easily articulate. He wasn't a prodigy who sat down at a piano at age 3 and played Chopin. He didn't belt out ballads at family gatherings like a miniature Pavarotti. What Hoseok did was move. Constantly. Restlessly. Almost compulsively. When music played, any music, from the jingles on TV commercials to the trot songs blasting from the radio in his grandmother's kitchen, his body responded before his brain could catch up. His feet shuffled. His shoulders popped. His head bobbed with a precision that looked almost rehearsed, except it wasn't. Nobody had taught him anything. He was 7, 8, 9 years old, dancing in the living room of their modest apartment in Gwangju, and his mother stood in the doorway, watching him with an expression that was half amazement and half concern. Amazement because the movement was undeniably natural. This wasn't a child mimicking what he'd seen on TV. This was a child interpreting music through his body in real time, creating shapes and rhythms that came from somewhere internal, somewhere instinctive. And concerned because she knew what happened to kids in South Korea who wanted to be dancers. They got told to stop. They got told to study. They got told that dancing was fine as a hobby but reckless as a dream, that the path to stability was a university degree and a corporate job, not a pair of worn-out shoes on a practice room floor. Hoseok's mother was not a wealthy woman. The young family lived comfortably enough. They weren't in the dire financial straits that some of Hoseok's future bandmates endured, but they were firmly middle class in a city where middle class meant careful budgeting, seasonal sales, and the occasional small splurge that required weeks of mental accounting beforehand. So when she made the decision to buy her son a portable CD player, a small, silver, battery-operated disc player from an electronics stall in Gwangju's Cheongdaeng-aro shopping district, it wasn't an impulse buy. It was a calculated choice. The player cost roughly 30,000 to 40,000 won, somewhere between 25 and 35 US dollars at the time. Not a fortune. But not nothing either, especially when you factored in the cost of batteries, which Hoseok would burn through at an alarming rate, and the CDs themselves, which his mother would buy secondhand from a used media store near the bus terminal. Scratched discs in cracked cases, hip-hop compilations, R&B collections, mixtapes with handwritten track listings on the insert. She didn't buy him a studio-quality speaker system. She didn't sign him up for Spotify Premium. This was the early 2000s. Streaming didn't exist yet in the way it does now. She bought him a plastic disc player with tinny speakers and a headphone jack that crackled if you moved the cable too fast. And she handed it to him one afternoon with the same understated delivery that seems to be a universal trait among Korean mothers giving gifts. No fanfare, no build-up, just a simple, here. So you can practice properly. Practice properly. 2 words that changed everything. Because up until that moment, Hoseok had been dancing to whatever music happened to be playing in the room. The TV. The radio. His older sister's cassette tapes. He had no control over the songs, no ability to rewind a section and drill a specific 8 count, no way to study the beat structure of a track the way a serious dancer needs to. But now he did. That CD player gave him autonomy over his own training. He could choose the song. He could pause it. He could replay the same 3 seconds of a beat drop 40 times in a row until his body had memorized the rhythm so deeply that he could execute the move in his sleep. And that's exactly what he did. If you talk to anyone who knew young Hoseok before he became J-Hope, his childhood friends, his neighbors, his teachers at the dance academy he would eventually attend, they all described the same scene. A skinny kid in the living room. Furniture pushed against the walls. The plastic CD player sitting on the floor in the corner, slightly tilted because the surface wasn't level. And Hoseok moving. For hours. Not just casually freestyling, but drilling. Popping. Locking. Isolating individual muscle groups with a discipline that would have been impressive in a 20-year-old professional, let alone a 10-year-old who'd never taken a formal lesson. His mother watched this ritual repeat itself day after day, week after week, and she made a second decision, one that built directly on the foundation of that CD player. She enrolled him in a local dance academy. The Joy Dance Academy and Plug-in Music Academy in Gwangju, where Hoseok would meet other young dancers, learn street dance fundamentals, and eventually join a crew called Neuron that competed in regional and national competitions. He didn't just compete, he won. First place at a national dance festival. Recognition from instructors who told his mother, with the kind of seriousness that's hard to fake, your son isn't just talented. He's special. You need to let him pursue this. And here's the detail that makes this story ache in the best possible way. Every single one of those victories, every competition trophy, every jaw-dropping performance that made audiences in Gwangju stand up and scream, all of it was rehearsed to music played on that same cheap CD player. Even after Hoseok joined the academy, even after he had access to proper studio speakers and sound systems, he still brought the portable player with him. It was his warm-up ritual. His comfort zone. The sound quality was objectively terrible, muffled bass, tinny highs, a slight wobble on the left channel where the speaker was starting to die, but it sounded right to him because it sounded like the beginning. It sounded like the living room in Gwangju. It sounded like his mother saying, so you can practice properly. When Hoseok eventually traveled to Seoul to audition for Big Hit Entertainment and became a trainee alongside the other future members of BTS, he entered a world of professional-grade equipment, studio monitors, soundproofed practice rooms, choreography drilled under LED lighting with mirror walls and hardwood floors. It was a universe away from the living room. But the discipline he brought with him, The ability to replay a section endlessly, to isolate a movement and perfect it at molecular level, to treat every practice session like a performance and every performance like a prayer. That was built on a CD player and a mother's permission. J-Hope became BTS's main dancer. Not lead dancer, main dancer, the highest designation, the member whose job it is to anchor every choreography, to set the standard of precision that the rest of the group calibrates to. Watch any BTS performance, Idol at the Melon Music Awards, Dionysus at the Muster, On at the Grand Central Terminal shoot, and your eyes will inevitably be pulled toward Hoseok. Not because he's the loudest or the flashiest, but because his control is so absolute that it creates a gravitational field. Every angle is intentional. Every transition is seamless. Every beat lands on the exact millisecond it's supposed to, as if the music is following him rather than the other way around. His solo work, Chicken Noodle Soup, featuring Becky G, his album Jack in the Box, his headlining performance at Lollapalooza 2022, where he became the first South Korean artist to headline a major US music festival. All of it radiates the same energy, disciplined, explosive, joyful, and rooted in a work ethic that was forged not in a state-of-the-art studio, but on the floor of a Gwangju apartment with a $30 CD player spinning scratched discs. And here's what ties it all together. Hoseok chose the name J-Hope because he wanted to be a source of hope for others, a light in the darkness, a reason to smile when everything feels heavy. But the first person who gave him hope wasn't a mentor or a CEO or a famous choreographer. It was a woman in Gwangju who could have easily said, "Stop dancing and open your textbook." Instead, she walked into an electronics stall, picked up a cheap silver disc player, and told her son to practice properly. She didn't give him a dream. She gave him a tool. And he turned that tool into a legacy that will outlive every expensive gadget ever manufactured. But if you think a CD player shaping a dancer's destiny is remarkable, wait until you hear what number 3's mother gave her son. It wasn't an instrument. It wasn't technology. Number 3, Jimin, a faded family photo in a wallet, the armor nobody could see. Here's a question that most people never think to ask about Park Jimin. What does the most captivating performer of his generation look like when nobody's watching? Not on stage, where his body becomes liquid, every gesture precise, every expression devastating, every spin so controlled that gravity seems like a suggestion rather than a law. Not in front of cameras, where he radiates that disarming warmth that makes every human being within a 10-meter radius feel like the most important person alive. No, what does Jimin look like at 2 in the morning, alone in a trainee dormitory in Seoul, lying on a bunk bed with the lights off, wondering if he's about to lose everything before it even starts? Because that moment happened. It happened more than once. And during every single one of those moments, there was one thing, exactly one thing, that stopped him from packing his bag and catching the next KTX train back to Busan. It was sitting in his wallet. Thin, creased, slightly faded at the edges from being handled too many times. A family photograph, no bigger than a credit card, printed on regular photo paper from one of those cheap instant print machines you find in Korean convenience stores, the ones that cost 1,000 won for 4 shots. His mother had slipped it into his hand the day he left home. Didn't wrap it. Didn't frame it. Didn't even put it in an envelope. She just pressed it into his palm, closed his fingers around it, and said, "When it gets hard, look at this and remember that we're still here." That's it. A photo. Not a plane ticket home. Not a promise that everything would be fine. Just a photo, his mother, his father, his younger brother, smiling in front of their apartment building in Jeomjeonggu, Busan, on what looked like an ordinary Sunday afternoon. Ordinary. That's the word that matters. Because nothing about Jimin's life was about to be ordinary, and his mother somehow knew that what he would miss most wasn't excitement or adventure, it was the ordinary. The sound of his mother chopping vegetables in the kitchen. The smell of laundry drying on the balcony. His brother hugging the TV remote. The specific quality of Busan sunlight coming through the living room window at 4 in the afternoon. She couldn't give him any of that in Seoul. So she gave him the next best thing, a frozen moment of everything he was leaving behind, small enough to carry in his back pocket, light enough to forget it was there, and powerful enough to destroy him emotionally every time he looked at it. Which is exactly what happened. Let's talk about what Jimin walked into when he arrived in Seoul, because the context matters. It's the difference between a sad story and a devastating one. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Busan. He attended Busan High School of Arts, where he majored in contemporary dance and was, by every account from teachers and classmates, the best student in his year. Not one of the best. The best. His technique was flawless. His musicality was innate. He moved with a combination of power and vulnerability that contemporary dance judges described as once in a decade. He was scouted and accepted into Big Hit Entertainment's trainee program, and he moved to Seoul with the quiet confidence of someone who had always been told he was exceptional. And then Seoul broke him. Not all at once. Gradually. Methodically. The way the trainee system is designed to break people, not out of cruelty, but out of a philosophy that says, if you can survive this, you can survive anything. Suddenly, Jimin wasn't the best dancer in the room anymore. He was surrounded by trainees who had been training for years longer than him. His contemporary dance background, which had been his superpower in Busan, felt out of place in a hip-hop-oriented company. The other trainees could rap. They could freestyle. They had swagger and edge, and the kind of street credibility that came from growing up in the underground music scene. Jimin had pirouettes and plies. Beautiful, technically perfect, and in the eyes of the industry, he was trying to enter almost irrelevant. He was the last member confirmed for BTS's debut lineup. The very last. While the other 6 members had been training together, building chemistry, recording demos, and solidifying their positions, Jimin was on the edge, a question mark, a maybe, a name that could easily have been crossed off a whiteboard and replaced with someone else. He knew this. The uncertainty ate at him from the inside out. And then came the body image spiral. Jimin has spoken about this with a rawness that still startles fans when they encounter it for the first time. He wasn't eating. Not dieting in the way that health magazines recommend. He was starving himself. Going days on a single meal. Exercising until his vision blurred. Weighing himself multiple times a day and feeling physically sick when the number didn't drop. He wanted to disappear into a shape that he thought the camera demanded, a shape that he thought the company expected. A shape that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with a 17-year-old boy trying to be small enough to fit into a space that kept shrinking. During this period, the darkest chapter of his pre-debut life, Jimin would lie on his bunk bed after everyone else was asleep and take out that photo. He'd hold it close to his face in the dark, tilting it toward whatever sliver of streetlight came through the window, and stare at it until the face is blurred. His mother's smile. His father's hand on his shoulder. His brother's goofy expression. The apartment building behind them, sun-bleached and unremarkable, the kind of building that exists in every neighborhood in every city in Korea and means absolutely nothing to anyone who doesn't live there. But to Jimin, that building was the center of the universe. That photo was a mirror, not the kind that shows you your body, which had become his enemy, but the kind that shows you your context. It reminded him that he existed before the trainee system. That he was loved before anyone evaluated his dance technique or measured his waistline. That the people in that photograph weren't waiting for him to become an idol, they were waiting for him to come home, whatever that looked like, whenever that happened. And every time he put the photo back in his wallet, he made the same decision. One more day. Not, I'm going to debut and become a global superstar. Nothing that grand. Just, one more day. I'll stay one more day. That decision, repeated hundreds of times across months of exhaustion, self-doubt, and near starvation, is the only reason Park Jimin stood on the stage of Net's M Countdown on June 13, 2013, as a debuted member of BTS. One more day, multiplied by enough days, became a career. Became Lie on the Wings album, a song about the masks we wear that showcased his ability to fuse contemporary dance with K-pop in a way no one had ever seen. Became Serendipity, an introduction track so ethereal and intimate that it redefined what a boy group member's solo could sound like. Became Filter, became Set Me Free PT2, became Face, his debut solo album that hit #2 on the Billboard 200. Became Jimin, the artist who consistently tops brand reputation rankings, who sells out solo concert dates in seconds, whose every Instagram post generates millions of interactions within minutes. And through all of it, through sold-out stadiums in every continent, through the chaos of fame at a scale that would crush most human beings, he still carries something in his wallet. He doesn't show it on camera. He doesn't talk about it in interviews. But in a 2018 Bangtan Bomb, there's a blink and you miss it moment where Jimin opens his wallet to grab a card, and for exactly 1.5 seconds, you can see the edge of a small photograph tucked behind the card slots. Faded. Creased. Loved into fragility. You can't see the image clearly. But you don't need to. Because you already know what it is. It's a Sunday afternoon in Jeomjeonggu. It's sunlight through a living room window. It's a mother who understood that the most powerful shield you can give a child heading into battle isn't made of steel, it's made of memory. 35 won at a convenience store print machine. Priceless in a wallet. But stay locked in because #2 is about to take this entire conversation to a place you don't expect. This next mother didn't give her son an object, a photograph, or even a memory to hold on to. She gave him a window, a literal window into a world he'd never visited, a language he'd never spoken, and a version of himself that didn't exist yet. And without that window, there is no BTS as you know it. Not a chance. Not a universe where it happens. You ready? #2. RM, a second-hand Friends DVD box set, the key that unlocked the entire world. September 24th, 2018. The United Nations General Assembly Hall in New York City. Chandeliers the size of small cars hang from the ceiling. Delegates from 193 nations sit in rows of polished wood seats, wearing earpieces for simultaneous translation, flanked by advisors and interpreters. Presidents, prime ministers, and diplomats, people who have spent decades navigating the most complex geopolitical landscape on Earth, sit waiting. And then a 24-year-old man from Ilsan, South Korea, walks to the podium. He's wearing a navy suit. His hands are shaking. You can see it if you watch the footage closely, that slight tremble in his fingers as he adjusts the microphone. His name is Kim Namjoon. The world knows him as RM, the leader of BTS. And he opens his mouth and speaks, not in Korean through a translator, not reading phonetic English off a teleprompter. He speaks fluent, nuanced, emotionally devastating English to the most powerful room on the planet. I had many dreams as a child, he says, his voice steady now, the trembling absorbed into conviction. I want to hear your voice. I want to hear your conviction. No matter who you are, where you're from, your skin color, your gender identity, just speak yourself. The room erupts. Not polite diplomatic applause, genuine, surprised, moved applause from people who have heard thousands of speeches in that hall and are rarely stirred by any of them. Within hours, the clip goes viral. Within days, it becomes one of the most watched UN speeches in history. Headlines across the globe read, BTS leader delivers historic address to United Nations. Think pieces flood every major outlet from the New York Times to The Guardian to NHK to Al Jazeera. A K-pop idol just spoke to the world in the world's lingua franca and the world listened. Now freeze that image. Hold it in your mind, Namjoon at the UN podium, speaking English to 193 nations, and rewind. Rewind past the sold-out stadiums. Past the Billboard #1s. Past the Grammys red carpet and the carpool karaoke and the interviews with Ellen and Fallon and Colbert where Namjoon translated not just words, but entire cultural contexts in real time, making 7 Korean boys accessible to an English-speaking planet. Rewind all the way back to a 2-story house in Ilsan, going a planned suburban city about 20 kilometers northwest of Seoul, the kind of place where families move for good schools and quiet streets and the promise of a stable, unremarkable life. It's the early 2000s. Kim Namjoon is 11 years old. And his mother has just come home from a secondhand media store with a plastic bag containing a used DVD box set of an American television show called Friends. 10 seasons. 236 episodes. 6 fictional New Yorkers navigating love, careers, and coffee shop conversations in a Manhattan that doesn't really exist. The box is scuffed. Some of the disc cases have cracks in them. The shrink wrap is long gone, replaced by a rubber band holding the set together. It cost his mother somewhere in the range of 15 to 20,000 won, roughly 12 to 15 US dollars at the time. She didn't buy it because she was a fan of Jennifer Aniston. She didn't buy it because she had a sophisticated understanding of second language acquisition theory. She bought it because her son had started bringing home English worksheets from school, and unlike every other subject, where Namjoon excelled effortlessly, because this is a boy whose IQ was later measured at 148, who scored in the top 1.3% of the National University Entrance Exam, English was giving him trouble. Not the grammar. Not the vocabulary. The sound of it. The rhythm. The way native speakers swallowed syllables and connected words in chains that bore no resemblance to the neat, separated pronunciation taught in Korean classrooms. Namjoon could read English on a page. He couldn't hear it in the air. And his mother, a practical woman with a practical solution, remembered something a coworker had once mentioned. My nephew learned English by watching American TV shows with subtitles. Just let them absorb it naturally. So she went to the used media store. She chose Friends because it was available, because it was cheap, and because the shopkeeper said, "This one's popular, easy to follow, lots of everyday conversation." That was the entire selection process. No algorithm. No educational consultant. A shopkeeper's casual recommendation and a mother's $12. What happened next has been recounted by Namjoon himself in multiple interviews, and every time he tells it, you can hear the wonder in his voice. The amazement of a grown man looking back at a childhood moment and realizing that his entire life turned on a hinge so small it was almost invisible. He put the first disc into the family DVD player. He watched episode 1 with Korean subtitles. Then he watched it again with English subtitles. Then he watched it a third time with no subtitles at all. Then he moved to episode 2 and did the same thing. 3 passes per episode. 708 viewings to get through the entire series the first time. And then he started over. The second time through, he began pausing on phrases he didn't understand, writing them in a notebook, not a vocabulary notebook organized by category, like a school assignment, but a messy, chaotic stream of consciousness journal where English phrases sat next to Korean translations sat next to Namjoon's own confused annotations. Why do they say, "Could you be any more annoying?" Why is B stressed like that? Is this sarcasm? How do you do sarcasm in English? He was teaching himself pragmatics, the study of how context shapes meaning, without knowing the word for it. He was 11. By the time he was 13, Namjoon could understand roughly 70% of spoken English in real-time conversation. By 15, he was reading English language poetry, not textbook excerpts, but actual poems by Rilke in translation, by Whitman, by Langston Hughes. By the time he entered the underground rap scene in Seoul as a teenager under the name Runch Randa, he was writing lyrics that code-switched between Korean and English with a fluidity that made bilingual listeners do a double take. And none of it, absolutely none of it, came from a hagwon. Not from an English academy. Not from a private tutor. Not from a year abroad. It came from a second-hand DVD box set that a mother bought because she noticed her son was struggling and decided to do something about it with whatever she could afford. Now here's where this story transitions from heartwarming to historically significant, because what Namjoon's mother unknowingly did wasn't just help her son pass an English test. She single-handedly created the condition without which BTS's global dominance would have been mathematically impossible. This is not exaggeration. This is structural analysis. In the mid-2010s, when K-pop groups were beginning to gain traction in Western markets, there was a wall, invisible but absolute, that separated internationally popular from globally dominant. That wall was language. Groups could chart in Korea, Japan, and parts of Southeast Asia without English. But to break into the American market, which is the gateway to global mainstream media coverage, to the late-night TV circuit, to the Grammys, to the kind of cultural legitimacy that turns a music act into a phenomenon, you needed someone who could do interviews. Not scripted PR answers read off a card. Real interviews. The kind where Jimmy Fallon throws an unexpected question, and you need to respond with charm, wit, and cultural fluency in less than 2 seconds. RM could do that. Not because he was a genius, although he is, but because he'd spent years absorbing the rhythm, the humor, the cultural subtext of American English through a sitcom about 6 people in a coffee shop. Number 1. V. A single wildflower from a geochang field, the gift that taught a boy to see. Every gift on this list so far has been a thing. Recipes on paper. A keyboard with broken keys. A pair of sneakers. A portable CD player. A family photograph. A box set of DVDs, objects. Tangible, holdable, keepable things that you could put on a shelf or tuck into a wallet or plug into a wall. But the gift that sits at the very top of this list, the one that earns the number 1 position not because it's the most expensive or the most practical, but because it's the most profound, isn't something you can keep at all. It dies. It wilts. It crumbles between your fingers if you hold it too long. And that's exactly what makes it the most powerful gift any mother on this list ever gave her son. Kim Tae-young was born on December 30th, 1995, in the city of Daegu, the same city that produced Min Young-hee, though their paths wouldn't cross until years later in a big hit practice room. But Tae-young didn't grow up in Daegu. Not really. Shortly after he was born, his parents, both working, both stretched thin by the economics of raising a family in a city where the cost of living outpaced their income, made a decision that millions of Korean families have made across generations. They sent him to live with his grandmother. In Gyeochang. If you've never heard of Gyeochang, that's the point. It's a county, not a city, a rural, mountainous area in the western part of South Gyeongsang Province, about 2 hours southwest of Daegu by bus. The landscape is rice paddies, apple orchards, and hills that turn golden in autumn and white in winter. The population hovers around 60,000 people spread across valleys and villages, where everyone knows everyone and the loudest sound on most afternoons is the wind moving through barley fields. There are no entertainment companies in Gyeochang. No talent agencies. No music studios. No dance academies. There is soil. There are seasons. There is the slow, ancient rhythm of agricultural life, planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in fall, resting in winter. And there is silence. The kind of silence that city people mistake for emptiness, but that country people know is actually fullness, a silence stuffed with insect songs and water sounds, and the particular creak that wooden farmhouse doors make when the humidity changes. Tae-young grew up inside that silence. His grandmother raised him with the same no-nonsense tenderness that Korean grandmothers have perfected over centuries, feeding him until he couldn't move, scolding him when he tracked mud through the house, telling him stories about the village's history while they sat on the maru, the wooden porch that's the social center of every traditional Korean home. He ran barefoot through strawberry fields. He chased dragonflies along irrigation ditches. He lay on his back in tall grass and stared at clouds until the sky turned orange and his grandmother's voice echoed across the paddies calling him home for dinner. It was, by every measurable standard, an unremarkable childhood. And it produced one of the most remarkably perceptive artists the music industry has ever seen. But we haven't gotten to the gift yet. Tae-young's mother visited when she could. Not as often as she wanted. The bus ride from Daegu to Gyeochang was long, the ticket wasn't cheap when you were budgeting carefully, and work schedules didn't always bend for maternal longing. But she came. And every time she came, she brought something. Not store-bought gifts, not because she didn't want to, but because the budget rarely allowed for extras after the bus fare was paid. So she improvised. She brought homemade side dishes. She brought socks she'd gotten on sale. She brought small, practical things that a growing boy needed and a grandmother might not think to buy. But one specific visit that Tae-young would later reference in the kind of oblique, poetic way that's become his signature communication style, she brought him something different. She arrived in Gyeochang on a spring afternoon. The fields around the village were in full bloom, not the manicured blooms of a botanical garden, but the wild, chaotic, unsupervised explosion of color that happens when nature doesn't answer to a landscaper. Purple cosmos flowers lining the roadside. Yellow forsythia spilling over stone walls. white clover carpeting the spaces between rice paddies like scattered confetti. And somewhere between the bus stop and his grandmother's house, Taeyoung's mother stopped walking. She crouched down at the edge of a field, reached into the tangled growth along the footpath, and picked a single wildflower. Not a rose. Not a lily. Not anything with a Latin name that a florist would recognize. A wildflower, small, purple-blue, with petals so thin they were almost translucent, the kind of flower that grows everywhere in rural Korea during spring, and that most adults walk past 10,000 times without ever bending down to look at it. She carried it the rest of the way to the house. And when Taeyoung ran out to greet her barefoot, mud-streaked, grinning, she knelt down, held the flower out to him, and said something that, in its simplicity, contained an entire philosophy of existence. The exact words have never been quoted in an official interview. Taeyoung has alluded to the moment in several Weverse lives and in his personal writing, but he's never delivered it as a neat, quotable soundbite, which is itself very Taeyoung, a person who distrusts the idea that meaning should be packaged for consumption. But the essence of what she said, reconstructed from his various tellings, was this. Look at this. Nobody planted it. Nobody watered it. Nobody asked it to be beautiful. It just is. You're like this too. Nobody asked it to be beautiful. It just is. You're like this too. Read that again. Sit with it for a second. Because that sentence, spoken by a working mother to a small boy in a farming village that doesn't appear on most maps, is the key that unlocks everything Kim Taeyoung became. It explains why, in a group of 7 enormously talented individuals, Taeyoung is the one who consistently sees what others miss. Not because he's smarter, RM is the intellectual. Not because he works harder, Jimin and Jungkook are the relentless perfectionists. But because somewhere in the architecture of his consciousness, a mother installed a lens that filters the world differently. Taeyoung photographs like a painter. So here's where we land. After 7 stories, 7 mothers, and 7 gifts that wouldn't fill a single shelf at a department store. Let's lay them out one final time, not as a ranking, but as a mosaic, because when you see them side by side, something extraordinary emerges. Number 7, Jin's mother gave him handwritten family recipes on plain paper, and from those ink-stained pages grew a man who fed not just his bandmates, but an entire fandom's understanding of what it means to care for someone without being asked. Number 6, Suga's mother scraped together money. She didn't have to buy a second-hand keyboard with broken keys. And from those chipped ivories emerged a producer whose compositions have generated billions of streams and a Grammy-nominated body of work that redefined what Korean music could sound like to the world. Number 5, Jungkook's mother bought him a pair of unbranded white sneakers from a neighborhood market in Busan, and in those shoes a 15-year-old boy walked away from everything he knew toward a future that would make him one of the most watched performers on Earth. From Golden Closet films to the FIFA World Cup opening ceremony. Number 4, J-Hope's mother bought him a cheap portable CD player from an electronic stall in Gwangju, and with scratched discs spinning on that tinny speaker, a boy taught himself to move with a precision and joy that would make him the main dancer of the most successful group in history and the first Korean solo artist to headline Lollapalooza. Number 3, Jimin's mother slipped a small, faded family photograph into her son's hand before he left for Seoul, and that image, creased, bent, loved into fragility, became the invisible armor that carried a boy through starvation, self-doubt, and the razor edge of almost not debuting until he stood on the other side as one of the most magnetic performers alive. Number 2, RM's mother bought a second-hand Friends DVD box set for $12 from a used media store in Ilsan, and from those scratched discs a boy taught himself the language that would eventually allow him to address the United Nations, translate Korean culture for the Western world, and build the linguistic bridge without which BTS's global dominance would have been structurally impossible. And number 1, V's mother picked a single wildflower from the edge of a field in Gyeochang and told her son that beauty doesn't need permission to exist, and from that moment forward, a boy saw the world differently, and spent his life making sure the rest of us could see it too. 7 gifts. Combined retail value, probably less than $100. Combined impact, immeasurable, irreversible, and still unfolding. And here's the final thought, the one this entire list has been building toward, whether you realized it or not. We live in an era that worships luxury. We're told that success comes from expensive educations, elite connections, premium tools, and first-class everything. And see you, Army.